Property not subject to zakat. 1.5. A person does not pay zakat on items known as basic needs, which cover both their own needs and those of the people, dependent on them for their livelihood, residences, essential, household items, clothing, weapons, riding animals, slaves and servants used for service. 1 month or 1 year's supply of food and drink, books belonging to scholars, whether a single volume or a set and sets of tools belonging to artisans are considered basic necessities. These do not fall under the NISAB threshold. 16 household items in excess quantities not intended for trade, books, artistic tools, and clothing in excess of one's needs, as well as food and drink intended for consumption, decorative items other than gold and silver, and jewelry such as rubies, emeralds, pearls, and diamonds. Zakat is not required on these either, because these are not, either in reality or by legal definition, assets that increase in value. However, if they exceed basic needs and their value reaches at least a NISAB amount, their owners are considered wealthy. Although they are not obligated to pay zakat, they themselves may not receive zakat or SADAQAH. NIT becomes obligatory for them to pay FITR, SADAQAH, and sacrifice. An animal 17 zakat is not due on property that, although it belongs to a person, has left their possession such that they cannot benefit from it, and it is not foreseeable that it will ever return to their possession. Such property is called zimar, since such property cannot be considered nami equals productive. It is not subject to zakat. Debts that cannot be proven and are denied. Property taken by force, stolen, confiscated, or are unlikely to be recovered. Property that has fallen into the sea and is deemed unlikely to be recovered. Currency buried in the countryside whose location has been forgotten and other lost property fall under this category. Since these have been lost and cannot be utilized, they are not subject to zakat as long as they remain unrecovered. However, once they are recovered, the following applies. If they reach the NISAB threshold and become property subject to zakat, zakat must be paid 1 year after the date they were recovered. Example, zakat is not required for past years regarding a debt of 100,000 liras that was denied for years and could not be proven with evidence. However, if the debt is later proven and collected through the debtor's admission or evidence such as witnesses or documents, it becomes subject to zakat as of the moment it is proven. Once a year has passed, zakat must be paid on it. However, if the owner of the money also possesses other property subject to zakat, then zakat must be paid on those assets along with the zakat on the received property. It is not necessary to wait for a year to pass on these assets. According to Imam Zufar and Imam Shafi, zakat is also required for such assets for past years since ownership exists. 18. If a person has incurred a debt to others and, in exchange for a debt that they are required to repay, the debtor possesses an equivalent amount of currency, commercial goods, or livestock, this amount is not subject to zakat. Borrowed money, the value of lost property, dowry payments to wives, and zakat obligations from previous years all fall under this category of debt. Therefore, if a person possesses currency or merchandise equal to the NISAB amount beyond their basic needs, but also has a debt equal to that amount, zakat is not obligatory for them. 19. If a person has assets exceeding the NISAB, but also has some debt, the following is considered. If, after deducting the debt from their current wealth, the remaining amount still meets the NISAB threshold, zakat is due only on that remaining amount. However, if less than the NISAB amount, the value of 200 dirhams of silver remains, zakat is not required on it. 20. If a person has more than 100,000 lira, but also has a 100,000 lira debt from unpaid zakat from previous years, they are not required to pay zakat on this 100,000 lira because there is a debt equal to that amount. However, if the debt is 40,000 lira, zakat must be paid on the remaining 60,000 lira, although zakat is a right of Allah. If it is not paid, it may be collected by the highest authority and spent in the places where it is required to be spent. In this regard, Zakat is also considered a debt that people are obligated to pay. However, obligations arising from vows, expiation, FITR alms, and the obligatory pilgrimage are not subject to this rule. People cannot demand that these be paid. Therefore, the existence of such debts does not prevent the property one possesses from being subject to zakat. According to Imam Shafi, one who possesses property that reaches the NISAB threshold nami is still obligated to pay zakat, even if they have a debt corresponding to that amount. This is because the obligation of zakat arises from possessing an incremental nami, asset that meets the NISAB threshold. Since the debtor possesses such an asset, the debt of a free person is imputed to his person. It is not immediately imposed on the property in his possession. For this reason, he has the right to use this property as he sees fit. Debt and zakat are separate obligations. The existence of one does not prevent the obligation of the other. In our view, the debtor is poor. If he does not possess property exceeding the NISAB threshold, it is even permissible to give him zakat. Giving zakat, however, is obligatory for the wealthy. 2-1 Whether a debt demanded by others prevents the payment of zakat depends on whether the debt is in currency or consists of other property. In this regard, they are equal. Furthermore, whether or not the debt is due makes nitrogen monoxide difference. It does not alter the ruling. However, this debt must have been incurred before zakat became obligatory. Otherwise, a debt that arises after zakat becomes obligatory on a particular asset does not offset a previous zakat obligation. According to Imam Abu Yusuf, a debt incurred by a person does not prevent the obligation of zakat from arising. However, according to Imam Muhammad, it does prevent it. 22. A person who acts as a guarantor for debt is not required to pay zakat on assets equivalent to the debt for which they are guaranteeing. This applies whether the guarantee is given at the debtor's request or not, because a guarantor is considered a debtor. 2-3 When a debt is settled in any way, the zakat period for assets equivalent to that debt begins at the start of the year on the date of settlement. Example, if a person possesses property equal to the NISAB amount excess in addition to their basic necessities and also has an equal amount of debt, they are not required to pay zakat. However, if this debt is forgiven once a year has passed from the date of forgiveness, zakat must be paid on that amount reaching the NISAB threshold. This is the view of Imam Azam. According to Imam Muhammad, in this case, zakat is required once a year has passed since the property came into his possession. It is not necessary for a year to pass after the debt is settled. 2-4 If person who possesses separate nisabs for legal tender, cash, merchandise, and livestock known as same has a certain amount of debt, that debt cannot be offset against, such as a house. They may set aside whatever they wish from their zakat-eligible assets as a set-off and pay the zakat on the remainder. However, if zakat on some of these assets has already been collected by the government, then the amount equivalent to the debt is first set aside from the currency. If the cash is insufficient, commercial goods are set aside. If this is also insufficient, animals subject to zakat must be set aside. If anything remains that meets or exceeds the NISAB threshold, zakat must be paid on it. 2-5 Zakat is not required on houses, shops, income-generating facilities, containers, and tools that are owned by a person not for the purpose of trade but solely to collect rent from them, machines, and means of transportation. However, if the money collected from there, rent and income reaches the NISAB amount and there are no outstanding debts against it, they become subject to zakat once a full year has passed since the money was collected, or when they are added to other money or property subject to zakat. 2-6 According to two imams, Imam Muhammad and Imam Abu Yusuf, horses not used for trade, whether they are grazing animals or not, and whether the females and males are kept together or separately, are not subject to zakat. The fatwa is in accordance with this. according to Imam Azam and Imam Zufar, if these horses are kept for herding and the males and females are mixed together, they are subject to zakat. Nitrogen monoxide NISAB is required for these. Their owner pays 1/40 of their value as zakat dot. According to another opinion, 1 dinar, gold, or 10 dirhams of silver is paid per horse. Previously, 1 dinar of gold was equivalent to 10 dirhams of silver. The government does not collect this zakat. The person liable to pay may give the zakat to any poor person of their choice. 2.7. According to Imam Azam, male horses kept solely for non-commercial purposes, whether they are breeding horses or not, are not subject to zakat. However, according to Imam Azam, zakat is required for mar that are breeding, because there is a possibility that stray stallions may mate with them. However, another opinion attributed to Imam Azam has also been narrated. 28 donkeys, mules, hunting dogs, and leopards are not subject to zakat if they are not used for commercial purposes, even if they are kept as pets, because it is very rare for them to be kept as pets, and little value is placed on something that is very rare. 2.9. Beast of burden and double harness animals, animals raised in stables or in the countryside for slaughter and consumption or for breeding, and also animals known as alafa are not subject to zakat. According to Imam Malik, these are also subject to zakat because zakat is based on ownership and cost. Zakat is given as an expression of gratitude. These animals also constitute property and have a cost. 30 zakat cannot be paid on haram property. Anyone who possesses such unlawful property must return it to its rightful owner. Otherwise, it does not need to be given to the poorest charity. However, if haram property is mixed with halal property, and it is not possible to separate them, zakat must be paid on the entire amount. 3.1. Zakat is not tied to the owner's liability, but remains attached to the property itself. Therefore, if property is destroyed after zakat becomes due, the obligation to pay zakat is waived. However, if that property is spent by donating it to another person or using it to purchase a house, the zakat obligation does not cease. One must still pay the zakat on it. 32. If property set aside for zakat is lost, the zakat obligation is not waived. However, if the owner of the property set aside for zakat dies before it is distributed to the poor, that money passes to his heirs as part of his estate. 33. If a person who owes zakat dies without having bequeathed this debt, the money cannot be taken from their estate. Their property passes to their heirs. Those heirs who are legally competent may, if they wish, pay the deceased debt by donating a portion of their own shares. 34 ampere. Person acting as an agent for many others to pay their zakat must distribute the zakat assets received from them to the poor without mixing them together. If they distribute them after mixing them together, they will have given charity in their own name, and they must pay those zakat assets separately.